Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're going to talk about that one thing that completely changed how I scout for elk. Because if you've spent any time doing this, you've probably felt it. You put hours into maps, you drop pins, you mark basins, ridges, water, bedding areas. You feel like you're building a solid plan, and then you get into the field and it doesn't translate. You're in good spots, but nothing's happening. You're moving, looking, and adjusting, but it still feels like you're guessing. That was me for a long time. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent elk hunter and outdoorsman. In the beginning, I had a lot of information, but not a lot of results. And the problem wasn't that I wasn't scouting. It was that I was scouting the wrong way. There was one shift that changed everything for me, and it made scouting actually useful once I got into the mountains. It gave me direction instead of just options. And more importantly, it simplified everything. It took me from collecting pins to actually understanding how to hunt the areas I was looking at. And that's what we're going to break down in this episode. Let's begin with what I used to do and why it didn't work. When I first started taking scouting seriously, I thought I was doing a lot of things right. I'd spend hours on maps marking basins, meadows, water sources, bedding areas, anything that looked elky, really. And I'd build out layers of pins and feel like I was creating a solid plan before I ever stepped foot in the mountains. And on paper, it probably looked pretty good. It was convincing to me. But once I got into the field, it really didn't translate. I'd bounce from one pin to the next, check a basin, drop into a drainage, move to the next spot that looked promising. And even though I had all this information, I still felt like I was guessing because none of it was connected. I was scouting locations, but I wasn't scouting outcomes. I didn't have a clear idea of how I was going to hunt those areas. I didn't know where I needed to be, when I needed to be there, or how elk were actually going to move through that terrain. So every pin became just another place to check, not a place to hunt properly. And that's the problem I think a lot of elk hunters run into. Knowing where elk might be doesn't help you kill one, because until you can turn that information into an actual plan, something you can execute, you're just collecting options. And that was the shift for me, because looking back, I had information, but no direction. The shift that changed everything for me was simple, but it completely changed how I looked at the map. I stopped asking, where are elk? And I started asking, how do elk move through and use this area? Because elk are not static animals, right? They don't just sit in one place waiting on us to find them. They're moving constantly between feed and bedding, adjusting to pressure, shifting with the winds, changing based on time of day. And that movement is where opportunity really exists a lot of times. When I was scouting for presence, I was just identifying areas elk might use. I was looking for elk instead of how elk use an area, right? How elk move. I wasn't understanding elk. I was looking at basins, meadows, north slopes, and that gave me options, but it didn't give me a real plan, right? Not a realistic plan on finding the elk. Once I started scouting for movement and elk behavior, everything changed. Now I was looking for travel routes, how elk transition from one area to another, how they move through terrain features like benches, side hills, saddles, where those movements tighten up and where timing matters, because those are the moments you can actually hunt. That's when elk are exposed. That's when they're predictable. That's when you can position yourself instead of wandering through country hoping to run into something. And that's the difference. Location tells you where elk could be. Movement and behavior tells you where you can kill one. Because the truth here is that elk are killable when they move, right? Once I started thinking in terms of movement, the next breakthrough was understanding where that movement becomes more predictable. And that comes down to decision points. These are places in the terrain where elk are forced to make a choice, like benches or saddles or pinch points. Transition areas, one of my favorites that I have whole videos on, transitions between feed and bedding, areas where terrain limits their options and naturally funnels movement. Before, I would look at big areas, entire basins or entire ridges, and try to hunt all of it. But elk don't use the entire landscape evenly, right? They move through it in a very specific way. And when they hit those decision points, their movement tightens up. It becomes more defined, more consistent. And for us, the good thing is more predictable. And that's where everything can change for you because instead of just trying to find elk somewhere in a big area, you can position yourself exactly where they're most likely to pass through or use, right? You're no longer chasing them. Now you're intercepting them. And that's the big difference between wandering through country hoping to get lucky, like a lot of guys, and setting yourself up where elk movement actually has to happen. And once you start seeing terrain this way, you can't unsee it. You stop thinking in terms of just good areas and start thinking in terms of where does movement get controlled? Because that's what you're really hunting, not places, decisions, right? Elk decisions. And the truth is, the best spots aren't just where elk live, it's where elk have to choose. Hey, if you hunt public land elk and you're tired of grinding through random seasons, I built the elk hunting series of ebooks for you. Most hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack a system. And that's exactly why I built the elk hunting ebook series as a complete progressive framework for Western elk hunters who are done guessing and ready to hunt with intention. Volume 1 is going to be Foundations in Reality. I reset your mindset and expose the assumptions that quietly wreck seasons. In Volume 2, Finding Elk and Understanding Pressure, you'll learn how elk actually move under pressure so you can anticipate instead of react. In Volume 3, Terrain, Wind, and Position, I break down how to use landscape and thermals to consistently create opportunities. In Volume 4, Calling, Silence, and Pressure, sound becomes a decision tool, not an impulse. In Volume 5, Bow Hunting Execution, we're talking about close range strategy so you can finish your encounters. And in Volume 6, Late Season and Post-Rut, we're talking about how elk shift after the rut and how to adapt when others quit. This is a system built for consistency. This isn't theory. It's a structured system to help you find elk, read country, and make confident decisions every season. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 50% off at backboneunlimited.com. The next step for me was turning scouting into a plan, not just pins on a map. And this is where scouting actually becomes useful, right? Or it could stay a waste of time if you don't adjust. Because once you identify movement and elk behavior and their decision points, the next step is turning that information into a plan that you can execute. Because all that information without a plan is just information. Every pin needs to answer a few simple questions, right? Where do I set up? What wind makes this work? What time does any of this matter? If you can't answer those, then that pin isn't ready. It's just a guess. It's just a spot, right? That was a big shift for me. I stopped marking spots just because they look good, and I started forcing myself to explain exactly how I would hunt each one before I ever stepped foot in the area. Am I above or below this movement? Am I using a morning thermal or an evening transition? Is this a first light setup, a mid-morning reposition, or a last light opportunity? Now the map wasn't just a collection of places, it was a set of decisions already made ahead of time, and that changes how you hunt and scout. Instead of wandering into an area and trying to figure it out on the fly, you're already thinking through positioning, wind, and timing before you ever get there, and that eliminates a lot of hesitation and wasted time. It speeds up your decisions. It keeps you from wasting time because the goal isn't to find more spots, it's to understand the ones you already have better. A pin without a plan is just a guess. And this shift is what finally removed the randomness from my hunting. Before I felt like I was searching, right? Moving from spot to spot, trying to find out, hoping I'd land in the right place at the right time. And some days I felt close, but a lot of days I didn't because there was no consistency. But once I started scouting for movement, identifying elk decision points, and building a plan around each of those locations, everything changed. I stopped wandering so much. Every move had intention behind it. I knew why I was going somewhere, how I was going to hunt it, and what I expected to happen when I got there. And that alone, sped up everything. Decision making got faster. I wasn't second guessing where to go next or what to do. I already had a framework to follow. And because of that, I started getting into elk more consistently. Not because I was working harder necessarily, but because I was putting myself in the right places at the right times based on how elk actually move and behave. And that's when scouting becomes actionable. And when that happens, hunting becomes much, much more controlled because you're no longer guessing. You're no longer just reacting to sound or sign, and you're stepping into situations that already make sense before they even happen. That's the shift. You stop hoping to find elk and you start intercepting them, putting yourself where you need to be. And that's when everything starts to come together for you. This is when scouting actually starts working. The shift we talk about is simple, but it changes everything. You don't necessarily need better maps. You don't necessarily need more pins. You don't need to overcomplicate your scouting. You just need to change what you're looking for. Stop scouting where elk might be and start scouting for how elk move, where they commit, and how you're going to hunt it before you ever get there. That's something you can apply immediately. Next time you open a map, don't just mark a spot. Ask yourself, how do elk travel through this? Where are they forced to make decisions about this area? And how does wind and timing affect all of that movement? Because once you start thinking that way, everything is going to become way clearer for you. Your plan is going to tighten up, your decisions are going to get faster, and your time in the field is going to become much more productive. And most importantly, you stop guessing and you're going to start hunting with more intention. And that's the difference. Now, if you want to go deeper into elk movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the elk hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how elk actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. If you want hands-on application and real-time breakdowns, we have an in-person Elk Camp 2026 that is built around this same philosophy: structure, preparation, and execution in real terrain. We're going to be running you through a ton of these scenarios, looking at maps, learning how to apply the scouting to the hunt. You can check out the elk camps at backboneunlimited.com. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of elk resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.